Boker Tov. Today's Daf Yomi is Bava Basra Daf Pei Vav from Basra 86. We're going to start on Pei Hayam Abayz, 3 lines from the bottom. 85b, 3 lines from the bottom. Today's Daf is dedicated for a Shemir for the Chayalim, that's all for the Shvuyim, and a Yeshua for Am Yisrael in this Ace Tzara. So the the Gemara is discussing if a purchaser or lokeach brings his utensil into the domain of the seller. Let's just say he wants to get a barrel, he wants to buy wine, and the seller pours the wine into the purchaser's barrel that's in the property of the seller. Is that a valid method of acquisition? So the Gemara discusses this, is trying to prove this case from the bottom case for the Brisa on 85b, 4 lines from the bottom, or 3 lines from the bottom. Amar Rava Tashma Mashach Chamorav Upalav. Let's say a person pulls, let's say there's a seller who has fruits on a donkey or on his worker's back, and the purchaser drags them into his property. But since he's not dragging the fruits, he's dragging the donkey or the servant. Therefore, it's not an actual acquisition. So Moshe Chamar V'Polav V'Yachnisan, and he brought them into his house. Bein Pasak Ad Shel Madad Ubein Madad Ad Shel Pasak. Whether or not he actually counted it or fixed the price, both of them are able to go back. It's not a valid transaction. Why is it not a valid transaction? They can go back because he didn't do Mashiach on the fruits. He just pulled the donkey, not the fruits. But on the top of 86a, Pirkan. So let's say he unloaded the property, and the assumption in the Gemara at this point is that it's in a utensil. So the seller's utensil was taken off by the purchaser and placed down. Let's say the seller's utensil was taken off and placed down into the house of the purchaser. And the Rashbam says it doesn't matter who exactly does it. But then, and then if they have agreed upon price, neither one can go back, meaning it's a valid sale. But if they just counted it, but they didn't have an actual price, both of them could go back. We see from here that the purchaser is able to acquire it when the utensil is placed down in his property. And the assumption therefore is, Gemara is going to say how this proves the case, but the assumption is that the utensil is thereby nullified vis-a-vis the property of the purchaser. So, and so the Gemara now says, from the fact that the utensil of the seller in the domain of the purchaser does not acquire, meaning to say that the seller's utensil is negated by the property of the purchaser. The purchaser has acquired it there. It's not exactly the clearest language that we would have expected to be used there. So therefore, under those circumstances, therefore, we would also say that the purchaser's utensil, if it was in the domain of the seller, it doesn't work. He can't acquire it because it's negated by the property of the seller. So that's how the Gemara wants to answer this question. So it says, no, what are we talking about? This case is not necessarily talking about an item that's in a utensil. It's possible, but the reason why the purchaser is able to acquire it there is because he poured it into the property. It went directly onto the ground. We're talking about something that he poured onto the ground, and that's how the purchaser acquired it, but there's no utensil. So Ikbid Rava gets upset. Midei Shafran Katani doesn't say in the source that he poured it. It says Pirkan Katani, he unloaded it. So therefore, El Amar Mar Baravashi, the Misachli de Tumay. No, we're talking about a case where it's possible that he unloaded it, but it was something like garlic, like bundles of garlic that you don't really put them in a utensil. And therefore, that's how the purchaser acquired it. So we haven't answered the question directly, but it seems that the Gemara is uncomfortable with the idea that well, certainly this source is not a proof that the purchaser cannot acquire it by bringing his utensil into the domain of the seller. So Amrei Huna Bereder Amar Zuch Ravina, he says first, Milchli Pirkin Kantani doesn't say, since it says he unloaded it, Mali Pasak, Mali Lo Pasak. So first the Gemara says something that has been implicit, but we make it explicit. What does it matter if he has a price on it, if he unloaded it? Meaning to say, if he put it into the domain of the purchaser, and the purchaser acquires it because the utensil is negated or whatever. In this case, there's no utensil. The garlic is on the property of the seller. The garlic is on the property of the purchaser. Then why do they have to fix the price? What's the difference? So Ravashi. So Ravina explains as follows: it only works, all these kinyanim only work if there's smichos das, if there's an agreement on the price. If there's no agreement on the price, it won't work. And then Ravina says to Rav Ashi, I'm like, Ravina, Rav Ashi, let me try and bring you a proof to answer this question. Tashma, the Amr Shmuel, the Rabbi Shmuel, Nami Travayo, Caleb Shal Adam, Kono Abakol Makom. The Rabbi Shmuel say that the utensil of a person will acquire the place for him, Bikol Makom. That a person's utensils always acquire the object for him. What does it mean that the utensils always can acquire something? Doesn't it mean even if the purchaser brings it into the domain of the seller, it's able to acquire it? And the Gemara says, no, that's only in the case, that's where the seller was explicit, go and acquire it. So we see from here, and there are a few requirements in order for the purchaser to be able to acquire something with the utensil in the domain of the seller. One, they have to have agreed upon price. And two, the seller has to be explicit and he has to say, Zil Kani, go and acquire it. And now the Gemara introduces a related topic. Tanan, awesome. And the Gemara is going to challenge us from our Mishnah, or bring a proof from our Mishnah. Tanan, awesome. We learned in a Mishnah in Kiddushin, which is what we call real estate, assets that have a responsibility. It's real estate. They can be acquired with money, with a contract, or with this chazaka, with this proprietary act on them. But movables, they can only be acquired by being dragged. So property can be acquired with money, contract, or a proprietary act, but movables are acquired by being dragged. So the Gemara says, so we have a teaching coming up, and in Surah they taught in the name of Rav Chisda. Pumbedisa they taught in the name of Kahana, and some say in the name of Rava. When do we say that you acquire a movable? By pulling it? That's only something that it's not typically lifted up. But if it's something that's typically lifted up, let's say an iPhone, for example, then you can only acquire it with Hagbah by lifting it up and not with Mashicha. So the Mishnah had said that you acquire something, a movable with Mashicha. And this statement of the Amoraim was, when can you acquire something with Mashicha? When you can't do Hagbah, when you can't lift it up. But if you could do Hagbah, then Mashicha doesn't work. Yosef Abai v'kamar hashmaita. So Abai repeated this teaching of the Amoraim. So Rav Bar Masna challenged Abai from the case of that we learned in Masechah Shabbos. As an introduction to this idea, we have the principle of Kim Le B'Deravini, that if you do two violations at the same time, you're going to get only the more severe penalty and not the lesser penalty. So we say, Hagonev Kis B'Shabbos. It says, if let's say you steal a wallet on Shabbos, Chayev, you're going to be liable for theft, even though the assumption is you're carrying the wallet, and so therefore you're going to get skila for violating Shabbos. You're only going to get, and why are you responsible to pay for the theft if both penalties have both Both misdeeds happened at the same time. The reason is shekfar neschai v'gneva kodem she'avodei Iser Shabbos. And the reason is, says the Gemara, because you're already responsible for the theft before you violated the Shabbos. The theft took place in the house of the person being robbed, but then you carried it out into your public domain, and that was the violation of Shabbos. So there's two separate misdeeds. And so therefore you're first responsible for the theft, and only afterwards you're responsible for violating Shabbos. But let's say you're dragging out the wallet, so therefore you have not stolen it until you brought it out of the domain. Then you're going to be exempt from paying for the money, because the prohibition of Shabbos and the theft came at the same exact time. So since the Easter Shabbos and the theft came at the same time, therefore we're going to say you're not responsible for theft. You're only responsible for violating Shabbos, or only get punished for violating Shabbos. But says the Marvare Kiss the Bar Hagbahu. But this wallet is something that you could pick up. And so therefore, here's a perfect example where you acquired it by pulling it out. But why? Why does it work that you could acquire it by pulling it out when this is something that should only be able to be acquired by Agba? And so therefore, the theft should not have taken place at the same time as Shabbos. So the Gemara explains, so Abaye responds to this question, b'misna. No, there was a strap on it. And so therefore, since there was a strap on it, it's something that, like, let's say a little bag that you carry your money in. So Rav Ada thought he was talking about, let's say, a small wallet. And he says, I don't understand. Big deal. Even though there's a strap, you could still pick it up. So why is that an answer? So Rav Ada responds, oh, no, I mean, I'm also talking about a case where something that is a small utensil and you can pick it up. So he said, no, it's not a small utensil. Amarle, b'midi debayim, and we're talking about something that's so big, like a suitcase full of money, that requires a strap in order to pick it up. And so therefore, that's why you have to do Mashicha in that case, and not Agba, and that's why the Mashicha works to acquire it. So the Gemara says another attempt to challenge this statement of the Amoraim, that if it's a case where Hagba works, then Mashicha would not work. So the Gemara says, Tashma b'reshus mochar will kana achi yagbiena or achi yotziena b'reshuso. It says in our brisa that we had on 85a about the Arba Midos and the four distinctions by a seller, that it says if it was in the domain of the seller, you only acquire it if you lift it up or if you take it out of your domain, Mashicha, so from his domain. So we see from here you could do Hagba and you could do Mashicha. So we see even though it's something that can be lifted up, Hagba, you could acquire it through either Hagba or Mashicha. So Amar Nachmar Yitzchak, no, it's Dalin Katani. That price is talking about two different cases. If it's something that's a bar Hagba, you have to lift it. If it's something that's a bar Mashicha, you have to pull it. Midi the bar Hagba, Hagba, midi the bar Mashicha, Mashicha. So the Gemara says, again, another attempt to challenge these Amoraim, Tashma. We have the following case, Mochar Peros, and this is from our Mishnah on 84b. Tashma, Mochar Peros L'Chavero. Let's say somebody sold the fruits to his friend, and his friend did the Mashicha without the counting, Kani, and he was able to acquire the fruits just through this act of Mashicha. But why? The fruits are generally speaking something you lift up. The katani b'mashicha, and our Mishnah says the kani b'mashicha, you acquired it by lifting it up. Not by drawing it out. So we're saying, no, we're talking about here a very, very big amount of fruit, and therefore you acquired it only by dragging it. That Gemara says, if that's the case, what about the next clause, which says, that if you have, the next clause says that if you acquire flax, You have not acquired it until you move it out. You dragged it out. Auto pishtim b'shliflei ravervei milo avdi. So the next case of the Mishnah had said that if you want to acquire the flax, the purchaser only acquires it until he's yital talenu mimakom zeh makom achar, until he picks it up and carries it out to another place. That's what people do. As Rashbam explains, it's just talking like en passant, that you pick it up and you carry it. And so we see from here. And so since the Mishnah is saying that we're talking about you're doing something through Hagbah, that you're lifting it up, it's obviously the case that we're talking about a small package. And if that's the case, if the first clause is talking about a large utensil, why in the second clause would it be talking about a small amount that you could pick up? Atu pishtin b'shliflei ravervi miloavi. Why would they switch the case? Wouldn't you make bundles and flax in large bundles as well? And so therefore, why would the Mishnah then switch to a case of a small bundle that you could pick up? So the Gemara says, no, Shani Pishtan, no, the case of flax is different. And in fact, we don't make large bundles out of it. Why? Dimishtame. When you make the large bundles, then they get slip or they break or the packages break or whatever, it falls. So therefore, the flax is done in the small bundles that you can lift up. So Amrle, Ravino, Rav Hashi, I'll try and bring a proof to answer this question. We learned to the Mishnah in Kedushin on Chafei Amabeis, Tashma Behema Gasa Niknes B'Mesira, Vadaka Bagba. So a large animal, i.e. like a cow, you acquire that by handing over the reins or the hair to the cow, Vadaka, but the small animal, i.e. the sheep or the goat, that's by lifting it up. Says the small animal is also acquired by dragging it out. This little baby sheep, you could lift it up. The katani b'mashicha, and we still say you could acquire it even with mashicha. So this is a question. How can you say if you could do agbah, you only do agbah and not mashicha? And Gemara says, no, shani behema desircha. No, baby animal, it's hard to pick it up because it's squirming. These little babies are squirming. You'll be struggling just to get like a firm grip on it, and so therefore you could acquire it by pulling it out. So the Gemara has not really answered this question directly, but it seems to be that it has not challenged it. So the statement is valid, and if it's something that you could acquire with Hagbah, then you can't do Mashicha. So that's where the Gemara seems to land. But the Gemara now raises another question. Rav Shmuel Damri Travayu. So Rav and Shmuel both taught Kor B'Shloshim Ani Mochacha. So if a person, and this is also going to be another question that we raise on this statement from the Brisa that we said yesterday about the distinctions about the 4 types of sales. So Rav Shmuel Damri Travayu Kor B'Shloshim Ani Mochacha. So a person says, listen, I'm selling to you a core, a bundle of wheat for 30 seah. So I'm selling you 30 seah for 30 coins, basically. So 1 seah per coin. So that's what he says. But if that's what he says, and then he's pouring in the grain into his bucket, but he hasn't poured in all 30 seah yet, he's only, let's say, poured in 29, then we're going to say, even by the last one, he can go back because the deal was not done. He didn't give it over to him yet. And so, and we say, because basically what we hear the seller saying is that he wants all of the 30 coins, meaning to say he's selling him exactly this amount for exactly 30 coins. And so therefore, it's one large sale, and until he counts out the last seah, he has not acquired anything. But if he says Kur B'Shloshim, this seah B'Selani Mocher L'cha, but let's say he says, I'm selling you a core for 30 seah. And so I'm selling you 30 seah for 30 seah. But he then says seya b'sela ani mochacha. For each seya, I'm charging you a sela. So then it seems he's not one large sale, but it's 30 separate sales. So rishon kana. So each time he pours in one seya, then the purchaser has acquired the one seya. So that's the position of Rav and Shmuel. So Tashma, the Gemara challenges Rav and Shmuel because it says in the Brisa that we said yesterday, now let's say it was let's say the second one, that case that we said yesterday, if the measuring utensil belonged to either the purchaser or the seller, Rishon Kana, then you acquire it one at a time. Meaning to say, right when you pour it in, it was acquired by the purchaser. And if the utensil belonged to the purchaser, then we're going to say, as soon as it comes in, the purchaser acquires it. Even though the measuring utensil was not yet filled, he acquires it right away. Meaning to say, and the implication is, even if he said, I'm selling you a core for 30 sela, he would acquire it right away if it's the purchaser's utensil, because he owns it. And so for sure, in the law of Rav and Shmuel, where he sold him 29 midos, he should have acquired the 29. Even before, he wouldn't be able to go back. So the Gemara says, no. The first answer of the Gemara is Kagon to Amrway b'shnei masar hin b'shnei masar slime. He said to him, I'm selling to you this amount, which is a hin for 12 slime. Lug b'sela ani mochar lacha. Meaning to say, he uses this language. He uses this language about that was used in the second case. Kor b'shloshim seya b'sela. So that's what the Bryce is talking about. That he's using the language where we're talking about he measured out of one utensil, and it had marks on it. And Kedamarav Kahuna Shinasas Kedamarav Kahana Shinasas Ayubahin. That just like in the base of Mikdash, they had little marks on it, measuring each one on a lug. So you can measure the amount. Sometimes a chatzi lug, sometimes a lug. So Achinami Shinasas Ayubamidos. That there were marks on the measuring utensil. And so therefore it's as though he was measuring out it's as though he said each language. So basically he put it into a utensil which has 12 lug, and he says a lug basela. So it's the same idea that he had used this language where he's selling it little by little. So hold on, that's today's daf. We can go on a few more minutes, Baruch Hashem.